His boots slammed the sand. He didn't slow down. The noose tightened around her neck. She kicked, gasped. The marshal raised his hand, rifles cocked. Every man on the ridge turned. His coat flared as he ran straight into their aim. One bullet hit the dirt beside him. Another tore through his sleeve. He didn't stop. Her feet scraped the barrel she stood on. The rope stretched. The horses panicked. A third shot cracked. He leapt. His hand reached the noose. The barrel tipped. The rope jerked tight. His fingers slipped. Under the alley's crooked beam, the cowboy dropped to one knee behind a stack of broken barrels. The Apache woman sagged against his chest. Her breath came shallow. Her blood soaked his shirt. Wood creaked above. He looked up. Shadows moved across the wall. One held a rifle tight to his chest. Another dragged a spurred boot through gravel. They were closing in. He eased the woman to the ground. Her wrists were torn red, and her pulse fluttered against his fingers. She tried to lift her head, but it slumped sideways. The cowboy rose with his revolver drawn. His boot scuffed the stones. One of the shadows froze. He kicked the crate beside him. It slammed into the wall with a crack. A voice shouted. A gunman turned. The cowboy fired. The shot caught the man in the side of the neck. He fell backward into a stack of lumber. Gunfire erupted. Splinters exploded. The cowboy ducked again and crawled to the woman. She coughed once. He pulled her behind a barrel and checked his rounds. One bullet. Voices shouted behind the smoke. One called out to push him toward the east wall. Another flanked wide through the back alley. The cowboy steadied his hand, listened. Another boot. Another breath. He waited. Someone crept near. He fired blind through the crate. The bullet punched through dry pine and hit nothing. Empty. He dropped the revolver, lifted the Apache woman across his shoulders. She didn't fight him. Her body hung like rags. Her legs dragged dust behind him. A gunman rounded the corner and raised a shotgun. The cowboy twisted. A loud slam shook the air behind him. A door opened fast. A boy no older than 12 waved both arms. His face was smeared with soot, his eyes wide with terror. The cowboy lunged. The shotgun fired. The blast struck the crates behind him and shredded them into pieces. He fell through the doorway just as a second shot smashed the wall beside his head. Wood rained down. Nails scattered. The boy slammed the door shut. Dark inside. Muffled voices outside. Footsteps retreating. They weren't sure where he had gone. The boy dragged a bar across the door and motioned him forward. The cowboy turned. Ahead, a stairway led down into an old stable. The air smelled of leather and dust and lye. He carried the woman down. Her breathing was faint. The boy followed in silence. Behind them, smoke drifted through the bullet holes in the wood. Above the rooftops, the town rang with distant voices. Hooves, shouts, the echo of chaos still rolling through the gallows yard. The cowboy found a pile of burlap sacks in the corner, laid her down slow. The boy's father stepped out from the shadows, holding a lantern, holding a hammer. The man spoke no words, but his face said what the cowboy already knew. They had only minutes before the killing returned through that door. Inside the hidden stable behind the tannery, the heat of the day still clung to the walls. The Mexican leather worker stood near the doorway with the lantern shaking in his grip. His eyes moved from the cowboy to the Apache woman and back again with rising fear. He knew her face and the mark of the rope on her throat. "That girl was taken by the patrol 2 days past," he whispered through clenched teeth. "They dragged her through the square like a warning. Now every bounty hunter in the territory is hunting her trail. They are already in the alleys and they will not stop." The woman stiffened without warning. Her body arched as if struck by lightning. A harsh, wet sound tore from her chest. The cowboy caught her shoulders and held her down as the seizure rippled through her limbs. Foam touched her lips, and her breath stuttered in short, broken pulls. "Water," he said. The boy rushed forward with a tin cup, but most of it spilled across the dirt as she tried to swallow. Her throat was torn so deep the water ran pink, and her breath whistled as it passed the wound. The father turned his face away, unable to watch. The cowboy rose and crossed to the tool rack. He lifted a short iron rod and slid its end into the heart of the small fire pit. Coals shifted and sparked. The metal darkened, then slowly glowed dull red. Heat thickened the air around them. Firelight wavered across the hanging hides and the rough beams. The smell of leather mixed with burning iron. The cowboy knelt again beside her and steadied her jaw in his palm. Sweat ran down his temple as he brought the iron close. Her eyes locked on his face. She did not blink. Pain was already painted into her features, yet she did not pull away. Her chest rose in shallow, uneven draws as the iron hovered a breath from her torn skin. The boy pressed his hands over his ears, though no sound had yet come. The father gripped his hammer with both hands and whispered a prayer under his breath. The lantern flame trembled as if the room itself feared what was coming. The iron descended inch by inch. The air shimmered with heat. Her muscles tensed, and a faint sound started in her throat but never became a cry. The metal was moments from flesh when a sudden thunder shook the building. Boots hammered above the stairwell. A shout cut through the tannery. Wood exploded inward as the front door burst apart. Harsh daylight spilled down the stairs and shadows rushed with it. Iron halted mid-air as gun barrels filled the doorway. The leatherworker stumbled back against a post as splinters rained across the floor. The boy froze in place with his eyes fixed on the dark hollows of the guns. The cowboy did not turn. His arm held steady between flame and blood and fate. The first blast lit the doorway like a sunburst. The marshal came through first, coat wide, rifle high, his mouth open in a silent yell. Two gunmen followed behind with iron raised and dust caked into their faces. The father moved without thinking, stepped between the boy and the muzzle. The shot slammed him back. His chest opened in red. He dropped hard across the dirt floor and did not move again. The boy screamed once, then froze where he stood, his mouth still open, his legs locked, his father's hammer still gripped in his hand. The cowboy spun low. One hand scooped the Apache woman from the sacks. The other yanked the side hatch near the loft. Hinges screamed. Sunlight cut through. He shoved her up. She clawed for a grip and vanished into the hay. Her foot caught on a beam, but he lifted her through. Gunfire roared behind him. Splinters rained from the beams. A second shot missed by inches and punched through the wall. The boy scrambled behind a barrel. The cowboy reached up and tossed a saddlebag through the hatch after her. Then he reached for the match. Dry hay lined the east wall. Old, stiff, packed high. The match lit with a hiss. He threw it. Flame caught in a breath, climbed the wall fast. Orange licked the rafters, and smoke thickened like fog. He dropped low and crawled for the runoff trench behind the saddles. Fire roared behind him. The ceiling creaked. The gunmen cursed through the smoke. One screamed as a beam collapsed. The marshal tried to follow, but the smoke turned him blind. The cowboy reached the trench lid, kicked it open. Cool earth below. He dropped in with a grunt, landed on one knee, pulled himself through the crawl space as flames chased the ceiling above. He burst from the end of the runoff pipe into the alley. Rolled once, staggered to his feet. The tannery roof was already burning. Black smoke curled into the dry sky. Shouts echoed from nearby rooftops. Bells clanged across the plaza. He limped toward the far wall. His shoulder brushed sandstone. He kept moving. Kept low. His hand pressed against the fresh burn on his side. Behind him, a final rifle shot cracked. It echoed sharp across the bricks. Pain ripped through his leg. He dropped hard. Dirt bit his face. Blood soaked his pant leg near the thigh. The round went clean through, but it burned deep. He crawled behind a stack of crates and tore fabric from his coat, tied it tight above the wound. His hands shook, but he did not stop. Above the rooftops, the fire climbed higher. Voices shouted. Orders flew. Horses kicked in their stalls. The cowboy pushed off the wall and limped into the narrow path behind the alley. His breath came short. His vision blurred. But he did not stop. The Apache girl was somewhere ahead, and they were far from safe. The cowboy limped across the last stretch of dry gravel. His boot dragged behind him. Blood smeared each step. He crossed a narrow wash where the sand dipped low and the ground whispered dust beneath his heel. His breath came sharp. His leg burned, but he kept moving. She was there, half hidden behind a tall cactus, her eyes steady, her hands resting in her lap. Her chest rose slow and even. The sun leaned westward and threw long shadows across the scrub. He sank to one knee beside her and pressed a hand to the wound. Blood soaked through the cloth. She said nothing, just reached for the knife still tucked at his belt. He did not stop her. She placed the blade in the coals of a small fire hidden by the rock wall. The metal hissed as it heated. Smoke rose straight into the open sky. She pulled a strip of leather from the saddlebag and handed it to him. He bit down and leaned back. The blade came fast. She dug the point in clean. No wasted movement. His hands clenched the dirt. His back arched. She turned the blade and found the round lodged near the muscle. His breath stopped. Her fingers held steady. She pulled it free, dropped it into the dust. Steam rose from the glowing blade. She lifted it once more and pressed it against the open wound. He did not scream. The sound that came out of him was lower, rougher, something between pain and fury. Smoke curled from his thigh. The skin sealed shut. His body went still. She pulled the iron back and let it cool. She tied a fresh cloth over the burn and pressed her palm to his chest. His breath eased. His eyes stayed on her face. They did not speak, just sat with the sound of wind over stone and fire over coals. She took a stick and traced a shape in the dust, a circle with lines reaching outward, a sunburst. She tapped it twice. He reached into his coat, pulled the small leather string from around his neck. Beads ran along the surface in patterns worn from years of sweat and sun. He laid it beside the dust drawing. Her eyes widened. She reached for the necklace. Her thumb brushed the same symbol woven in faded blue and yellow. She turned it in her fingers, like memory itself had returned. He looked at her hand, looked at her eyes. Something old passed between them. Not shock, not fear. Something wordless. She closed her fingers around the beads, held them close to her chest. Then her eyes flicked upward. Across the ridge above them, a rider had stopped. A silhouette cut into the rock. Horse still. Rifle resting across the saddle horn. The cowboy reached for his revolver, but his hand stopped halfway. The rider did not move. The sun dipped lower. The moment stretched tight between the ridge and the wash. The rider on the ridge did not lift his rifle. He sat still in the saddle. The wind tugged at his worn cavalry coat. One shoulder bore a faded patch. Not government issue. His horse turned slow. The man pulled the reins and wheeled away. Hooves struck rock in steady rhythm. The Apache woman watched until he vanished behind the ridge. Then she turned and began walking deeper into the stone folds behind the wash. The cowboy followed with a limp. He kept one hand near his hip. The sun sat low now. Shadows lengthened across the canyon walls. They passed through a narrow split in the stone. The path twisted down into a dry ravine lined with mesquite and brittle sage. She pointed toward the west. Two ridges crossed in the distance like blades. He nodded once. Behind them, the scout rode hard. His horse kicked dust down the slope as he crossed a narrow rise and disappeared into the arroyos. He rode without pause, toward a hidden camp nested between high cliffs. Smoke rose from a single low fire far off in the shadows. Below that, smoke waited a half circle of tents and wagons, men stripped of badges but still wrapped in cavalry belts, rusted buckles, Spanish words mixed with Apache curses. Rifles leaned on crates. One rider looked up as the scout returned. He pointed back toward the canyon. Inside the rocks, the cowboy and the woman pressed on. She spoke her first words since the fire. Apache, sharp, measured. He listened close, answered in Spanish, rough but clear. Their voices stayed low, carried only a short distance. Nothing echoed in the stone. They reached a wide outcrop that jutted from the canyon wall like a broken ledge. Above them, loose pebbles rained down. Hooves moved across the rocks. Riders passed overhead. The cowboy pressed his back to the wall and drew his revolver. The woman stayed crouched. Her eyes locked on the dust. The riders did not stop. 2, maybe 3. Saddles creaked, a cough, then silence. When they were gone, she reached into her coat and pulled out a small carved feather, the tip worn smooth, the shaft marked with tiny slashes. She turned it in her fingers and handed it to him. He took it, read the marks. His brow furrowed. She pointed to her own chest, then raised 3 fingers, then lowered them one by one. She was the last. He looked at the feather again, then handed it back. She set it in the dust, took a stick, drew lines, a ridge, a wash, a camp. She pressed her palm beside one mark, alive. She circled it twice. She looked at him. He nodded. They covered the drawing with dry earth and stepped away. The canyon deepened ahead, and they were not alone in it anymore. They reached the mission ruin just as the sun cracked the edge of the distant rocks. The adobe walls leaned inward, crumbling, bone white, hollowed by time and silence. No birds, no wind, just the hush of dead years pressed into every stone. The wooden doors hung loose. One dragged in the dirt. The other rested sideways in the dust. They stepped through. The air inside was cooler, still. Shadows stretched long over the stone floor. Dust shimmered in slanted light. In the center of the chapel, a cracked beam sagged low. Ropes dangled from it. 2 bodies hung slack, one near the altar, one just left of center. Their boots did not touch the ground. The cowboy raised his rifle, stepped forward slow. The smell was faint. The death was not fresh. He looked up. The first had no shoes, clothes torn, skin tight over bones. The second wore cavalry boots, badges still pinned to the belt, skin dark with rot. The Apache woman stepped past him. Her gaze locked on the second body. She moved to the altar, climbed the low step, reached up, pulled at the chain around the dead man's neck. A silver cross dropped free. She caught it. She fell to her knees. Her fingers touched the initials etched into the back. Her shoulders folded inward. No sound left her throat, but her lips moved. One name. She bowed her head and pressed the cross against her heart. The cowboy stepped back, gave her the space. When she stood again, her eyes held a fire that had not been there before. She handed him the shovel. He nodded once. Behind the chapel, the ground was dry and soft. They dug in silence. 2 graves, deep and square. They laid the bodies down, covered them, marked the soil with stones pulled from the crumbling walls. She laid the cross between the stones. Night came fast. They built a fire outside the ruin. Low flames. No smoke. Just enough light to see by. The cowboy sat with his rifle across his knees, his eyes on the dark line where the rocks met the stars. He heard her hum before she spoke. Soft sounds in a language not meant for war. The melody rose like smoke. No shape, no words. Only ache. He did not turn. He watched the shadows shift between the stones, listened as her voice thinned and fell silent. The fire crackled once. Later, she slept beside the ashes with her arms curled beneath her head. The cowboy remained still, breath slow, rifle steady. The sound of night was wide and open. Just before dawn, he caught it. A boot step, slow, heavy. Gravel shifted behind him. His hand tightened on the grip. He turned his head. Another boot crunched the dirt. Someone had come to the chapel before the sun. The boot steps slowed in the gravel. The cowboy shifted his weight and rose to a low crouch. His rifle stayed close. The fire behind him gave just enough glow to stretch their shadows out toward the open chapel. Moonlight spilled over the broken wall. A figure stepped into it, long coat, wide hat, jaw rough with stubble. A leather vest hung loose over a faded shirt. Iron glinted at each hip. The man raised one hand slow. 2 more shapes flanked him, silent, rifles drawn, eyes hard. One held a coil of rope. The cowboy stood, said nothing. Behind him, the Apache woman rose from sleep like a drawn blade. Her hand reached for the knife she kept in her boot. Too late. They moved fast. The first two tackled the cowboy. The rope whipped tight around his chest. The third spun and drove the woman backward into the dust. She kicked, scratched, clawed. Her hands found his face. Blood ran down his cheek. He cursed and shoved her down. She rolled and lunged again. He slammed her into the wall. The cowboy struggled, elbowed one in the ribs. Head butted the other. He buckled, but the grip held. Fists landed hard. A knee in the gut dropped him to the dirt. They dragged them both under the chapel arch. The moonlight filled the space between pillars. Dry earth marked with scuffs and blood. They tied them back to back. Rough hemp pulled tight at their ribs. Arms locked together. Dust clung to sweat. The leader stepped forward. He pulled a folded paper from his coat, held it out with 2 fingers. The firelight caught the ink, a sketch of her face. Marked with red, Apache spy. Next to it, a rough image of the cowboy. Unknown. Wanted for obstruction. Beneath that, a reward. Dead or alive. But alive brought more. He smiled with no warmth. They spoke of what waited in the fort. Chains, knives, men who asked questions until the skin peeled away. The cowboy said nothing. The woman stared at the ground, breathing hard. Behind his boot, a knife stayed hidden, tied to the sole with twine and luck. He worked the edge against the rope. Slow. Careful. The leader turned to spit. The rope gave. He twisted, slashed wide. The blade caught one across the thigh. Blood sprayed fast and high. The man screamed and dropped to the ground, clutching his leg. The second bounty hunter drew his rifle. The woman moved. She dove for the weapon dropped in the dirt, rolled through dust, came up with it in her hands, fired. Missed. The shot cracked through the mission walls. The last bounty hunter vanished into the shadows. No footsteps, no sound. Only the open dark where he had stood. The leader was gone. The wounded one moaned in the dust. The rope hung loose around them. But the night had just begun. The wind shifted in the canyon. Dry, silent. Carried the faint smell of horses and sweat. The cowboy crouched low behind a curtain of stone carved smooth by centuries of wind. The Apache woman beside him watched the shadows move beyond the rocks. Footsteps returned. The last gunman stepped into moonlight, no longer hiding. A fresh coat slung over one shoulder, blue. With faded cavalry trim, 2 more draped over his saddle. He pulled the reins slow and studied the chapel behind them. His horse stamped once. Dust rose in a dull cloud around its hooves. He was not alone. This one was no bounty hunter. His eyes carried knowledge. His coat fit too well, his belt too clean. He was cavalry once. Maybe still. But the iron badge was gone. The colors worn without permission. He paused, then turned the horse. Disappeared into the cut between the ridges. The woman tapped the stone beside them, waited, listened. When she moved again, her hand went inside the saddlebag. She pulled a strip of hide wrapped around a wooden frame, unrolled it across her lap. A map, drawn in charcoal and ochre, ridges, washes, symbols layered in tight clusters. At the edge sat a painted mark, a mound, a half-sun buried in lines. She pointed to it, pressed her fingers to her chest, spoke one word, then another. Totem. The cowboy looked close, recognized the shapes, territory south of the dry river. A burial site, old, from a war before the patrols, before treaties broke, and broke again. Her voice lowered as she explained in fragments. The totem was placed there after the last war chief fell, sacred to her people, and dangerous in the wrong hands. The Comancheros were hunting it, not for belief, for profit, for barter, for power. If they reached it first, they would desecrate it, sell its pieces, use it to bargain with those who wanted Apache lands lost for good. She looked up, waited for his answer. He nodded. She traced a path through the ridges with her finger, then rolled the map tight again. Far below the canyon wall, torches flickered into view. 1, then 3, then 7. A line of riders moved slow through the pass, shadows long and broken across the stone. Their voices echoed, Spanish, rough. Orders barked to tired men. One torch swung in a wide arc. They were close. Too close! The woman packed the map and cinched the strap. The cowboy checked his rifle, reached down, helped her to her feet. They moved low through the rock folds, each step silent, each breath slow. Behind them, the torches climbed higher. Ahead, the canyon twisted into darkness, and the path to the grave waited quiet, hidden, but not for long. They climbed the last slope in silence. The moon hung low behind them, dust curled around each step. The cowboy's limp slowed them, but she never looked back. Her hand brushed the stone wall to guide them. At the crest, they reached the plateau. Stacks of flat stones rose in uneven towers, weathered, cracked. Markers, not graves, not warnings, just signs left by those who came before. She paused and counted them. 4 towers. One collapsed. She moved to the center and crouched low beside a smooth slab pressed into the earth. She cleared it with both hands. Beneath lay a gap in the rock, a thin slit just wide enough to crawl through. She reached into her pack, pulled flint and steel, a single torch wrapped tight in canvas. The cowboy crouched beside her, lit the torch. The flame sputtered, then held. He passed it forward. She ducked first, slid inside. The light vanished with her. He followed. Inside the cave, the air cooled, dry, still. The torchlight danced over the walls. Shapes carved into the stone caught the flame. Warriors, animals. A circle with a broken spear inside. Deeper in the shadows lay bones, scattered, long settled. One rib cage still held a blade. At the far end, a bundle rested on a ledge. She crossed to it on her knees, lifted the hide with both hands. Inside was a single spear, blackened with age, feathers tied just below the point, red, yellow, one white. No rust touched it, no dust lay upon it. She bowed her head, held the spear across her arms, whispered in the old tongue. The cowboy stood near the entrance, rifle at the ready. The fire cast his shadow across the back wall. His breath slowed. His eyes scanned the narrow gap behind them. Outside, a voice echoed, distant. Laughter followed. Horses snorted. Another voice called out, closer. She rose and stepped back toward him. Her eyes said what her voice did not. They had been followed. They moved fast, torch held low. She wrapped the spear again and tied it to her back. The cowboy checked his rounds. Gravel fell from above. The light at the cave mouth shifted. A torch rolled down from the rocks above. It hit the ledge outside and burst. Fire scattered across the stone. Men shouted. A rifle cracked. The front wall exploded. Stone shattered. The flame whipped sideways. Bullets punched through the mouth of the cave. The cowboy tackled her behind the wall. Chips of rock rained down. Dust filled the air. He fired once, twice. Screams echoed beyond the fire. She crawled behind a ridge of fallen bones, clutched the spear tight, eyes fierce, no fear, no hesitation. Voices climbed the wall outside. Boots scrambled for footing. The cave had been found. Now they would fight to keep what should never be lost. The cave mouth glowed with muzzle flashes. Dust choked the air. Gunshots cracked off stone. The cowboy pressed close to the wall. Outnumbered. No clear path. No time to wait. The fire from the torch outside still burned across the ledge. He reached for the second torch, lit it fast, eyes steady, wound his arm back and threw it high through the gap. The flame sailed, hit brush above the rocks. Dry leaves caught in seconds. Smoke curled up the canyon wall. Wind carried it down. Flames reached fast and wide. The shouts outside turned to curses. Horses screamed. Riders scattered as heat rose around them. The smoke thickened, covered the cave in a rolling sheet of ash and firelight. The Apache woman climbed through the side fissure in the rock, rifle in hand. She rose above the ledge and took position on a jut of stone. The old rifle steadied on her shoulder. Her eyes narrowed through the smoke. She fired once. A shot echoed. A rider dropped. Below her, chaos unfolded. Shapes moved fast. Hooves kicked up sand. One torchbearer fell beneath his own horse. The cowboy pushed through the mouth of the cave and vanished into the smoke. A horse thundered past him, blind. He reached and grabbed the rider's arm. Pulled hard. Their weight collided. They tumbled into the dust. The cowboy slammed a fist into the man's jaw. The rider went limp. His rifle fell to the side. The cowboy rolled to his feet. Voices called out, one louder than the others, the scout. Same faded cavalry coat, same hollow eyes. He rode to the edge of the smoke, saw the Apache woman above, saw the totem tied across her back. His horse reared once, then stilled. The scout lifted his hand. He shouted in Apache. She stepped out from cover, answered him. Her voice carried with weight, with memory. She named her father, named the battle he died in, named the mountain where her bloodline began. The scout lowered his weapon. Other rifles dropped one by one. Men stopped firing. One raised his hands, another turned his horse away. The fire crackled beside them. Smoke parted for a moment. Faces appeared through the haze, uncertain, ash-covered, waiting. The cowboy moved beside her, gun ready but not raised. His breath came hard. His eyes stayed locked on the last man, the one in the rear. Hat pulled low, jaw clenched, no badge, no emblem, no cause. His hand moved too fast. The flash of a pistol, one shot. The sound cut through the canyon like a blade. The woman flinched, the cowboy turned. Time slowed, and blood touched the edge of the stone. The shot cracked through the smoke. The cowboy spun. Dirt kicked at his boots. The bullet missed his chest by inches. He dropped to one knee, raised his revolver, fired once. The shooter's body jerked backward, arms wide. His pistol tumbled from his grip. He hit the stone with a sound like dropped meat. Dust settled around him. His eyes stared at nothing. Silence followed. The wind held still. The smoke thinned. The comancheros stood frozen. The scout looked once at the body, then turned to the woman. She stepped forward, untied the deer-hide bundle from her back. She unwrapped it slow, pulled free the totem, the blackened spear with its faded feathers. Red, yellow, white. She lifted it high with both hands, held it above her head as the moonlight caught the blade. The scout dismounted, dropped to one knee, pressed his palm to the ground. One by one, the others followed. Not soldiers, not enemies. Just men who saw what stood before them. The last blood of a fallen chief. The bearer of a sacred war sign. The woman turned and planted the spear into the ridge. Its point pierced the stone. The feathers caught the wind. The cowboy stood beside her, rifle lowered. No one spoke. The scout rose first, mounted without sound, gave one last nod, then turned his horse and vanished into the dark. The others followed, quiet. No shouts, no guns, just dust and hoofbeats fading down the canyon trail. The fire behind them died slow. The woman and the cowboy stood alone. No rope bound them now, no mark of law, no hand chasing their tracks. They turned from the ridge and began the climb down. Her hand found his. Their fingers locked without words. Step by step, they left the blood behind. At the base of the canyon, they stopped beside a small stone shelf. The spear from the cave lay there, wrapped again in deer hide, protected, waiting. She reached into her coat, pulled the broken noose from the gallows yard, torn where the cowboy's blade had cut it. She tied the ends together. A loop now. A circle. She placed it beside the spear, pressed a hand to both, whispered something into the dust. The cowboy removed his revolver, set it on the stone. No need for it now. They stepped back, looked once more at the ridge above. The smoke gone, the danger past, the ground theirs again. Then they turned, walked out into the open desert. The moon stretched shadows behind them. No rope, no chains, no past. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, and comment on the Old Western Tales.